But I've also seen the other kind, the ones who see vulnerability as opportunity. As I studied him, I couldn't yet prove which one he was, but I could feel it. There was a calculation in his eyes that didn't belong to someone who cared. Mrs. Walsh is listed here as a... I said. He stiffened, only slightly. Your Honor, that's not necessary.
Mrs. Walsh is elderly?
She gets confused easily.
That's when I knew something was wrong.
It's always the same pattern. When someone tells you their accuser is confused, that usually means they're terrified of what that person might say. She's here, I said, and she's competent to testify. Let's hear from her. He opened his mouth to object again, but I stopped him. Mr. Petrov, you'll have your chance. Sit down. He did, but the smile was gone now. The smooth confidence had turned into something tighter, sharp. I could see it in his posture. The first ripple of fear breaking through, and as Mrs. Dorothy Walsh slowly made her way to the stand, frail, trembling, clutching her walker like a lifeline, the whole courtroom shifted. You could feel it in the air. The story was no longer about a license or an insurance document. It was about trust. It was about power. It was about what happens when someone kind meets someone cruel. I've seen many moments of truth in my court, but that morning I had a feeling this would be one of the most painful and one of the most important. Because sometimes justice doesn't start with evidence. It starts with instinct. And that instinct was screaming that Alex Petrov wasn't just careless. He was dangerous. When Mrs. Dorothy Walsh approached the witness stand, you could feel the courtroom grow still. The kind of stillness that isn't forced, but born from quiet respect. She was small in stature, dressed in a pale blue coat that looked a few sizes too big, and carried with her the fragile dignity of someone who had lived a long life of decency. I watched her as she was sworn in. Her voice trembled as she repeated the oath, but her eyes, those pale, steady eyes, were clear. There was fear there, yes, but also determination. I've learned over the years that truth doesn't always arrive with thunder and shouting. Sometimes it comes with a whisper. Mrs. Walsh, I began gently. Please take your time. Can you tell the court how you know Mr. Alex Petrov? She glanced at him briefly. Just a flicker, and then looked back toward me. He used to help me, Your Honor, she said softly. He said he was a caregiver. My son found him through an ad online. After my husband passed, I needed someone to drive me to my appointments and help with the groceries. Alex was very kind at first. The words at first hung in the air. You could feel them settle on every person in that courtroom. Eat it, Miss Walsh? I asked. She took a deep breath. He used to bring me flowers sometimes. He'd call me Miss Dorothy and tell me I reminded him of his mother. I thought, she paused. I thought he cared. From the corner of my eye, I saw Petrov fold his arms, leaning back like a man waiting for a bad play to end. That smugness, I've seen it before. It's the armor of a guilty conscience. Go on, ma'am, I said softly. Her hands trembled slightly as she continued. Then one day he told me my car needed new tires. I didn't know anything about that sort of thing, so I gave him my debit card. He said he'd take care of it. When he came back, he gave me a receipt. Everything looked fine, but later my bank called. There were charges, lots of them. Jewelry stores, online transfers, thousands of dollars. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I turned to Petrov. He didn't flinch. He kept that same calm expression, that same polite half smile. I'd seen criminals react with rage or panic, but this was worse. This was the calm of someone who believed he was smarter than the truth. Mrs. Walsh, I said carefully, did you confront Mr. Petrov about these charges? Yes, she did. I've seen that look before, the moment when arrogance meets accountability. I leaned forward, my hands clasped. Mr. Petrov, I said evenly, you've just heard Mrs. Walsh's testimony. She has provided a detailed account of how you gained her trust and used it for personal benefit. I'll give you a chance to speak. But I warn you, choose your words carefully. This court values truth above performance. He cleared his throat, smoothed his tie, and looked up with a forced calm. Your Honor, he began. Mrs. Walsh is mistaken. She's an elderly woman who's had difficulty managing her finances. I was only trying to help her. Every purchase I made was for her benefit. Home repairs, car maintenance, even groceries. I have records to prove. He gestured toward a neatly organized binder on the table, every page tabbed and labeled. An impressive display if you didn't know how deception often hides behind order. I nodded. And then let's see it? And then they handed me the binder. The first few pages did show legitimate receipts. Small purchases, grocery store transactions, gas payments. But as I flipped further, something didn't add up. The amounts began to climb. $400 here, $900 there. Then a $2,500 jewelry purchase, another $1,800 electronics bill. I looked up. You're telling me these are all for Mrs. Walsh? She wanted to feel independent again. I helped her buy things that made her happy. Such as a gold bracelet? I asked, pointing to one of the receipts. Yes, sir, it was her idea. She said it reminded her of her late husband. Mrs. Walsh's voice trembled from the gallery. That's not true. I raised a hand gently to calm her, then turned my gaze back to Petrov. And this, I said, flipping another page, a 65-inch television. Petrov smiled faintly. If she enjoys her shows, Your Honor? The courtroom erupted in quiet disbelief. A few stifled laughs of pure astonishment. I didn't need to raise my gavel. The tension was disciplined enough. Petrov, I said slowly, do you expect this court to believe that a 78-year-old woman, nearly blind and on a fixed income, requested luxury jewelry and a television the size of a wall? His composure faltered for just a second, a tiny crack in the mask. Your Honor, I cut him off. Now you can stop right there, because the more you speak, the clearer it becomes that your kindness was nothing more than camouflage. That's when his tone changed. The charm evaporated. What replaced it was sharp, defensive arrogance. Your Honor, I've been helping people like Mrs. Walsh for years, he said, his voice rising. I've spent time, money, and energy on people who barely appreciate it. And now, because one forgetful old woman misreads her bank statements, I'm being painted as a criminal? Rose. That sentence, that single act of cruelty told me everything I needed to know about the man sitting before me. I leaned back, studying him. Mr. Petrov, do you hear yourself? You call her forgetful as if her age diminishes her worth. You speak about her money as though it was your reward for pretending to care. That's not caregiving. That's predation. He glared at me, but said nothing. I continued, my voice steady. High predator doesn't just take what he wants by force. Sometimes he uses kindness as bait. He listens, he comforts, he smiles, and while the victim feels safe, he takes everything that isn't nailed down. You didn't rob Mrs. Walsh at gunpoint, but what you did was worse. You robbed her of trust. Petrov's attorney tried to interject. Your Honor, objection. Overruled. This isn't theater. This is truth. I turned to the clerk. Please play the evidence submission, Exhibit C. The small video played on the screen beside the bench. It was from a home security camera installed by Mrs. Walsh's son. The footage showed Petrov entering her home while she was in another room. He opened her mail, took an envelope, and placed it into his jacket pocket. The timestamp confirmed it. 11:37 a.m. on a Tuesday, a day he had claimed to be shopping for groceries. The silence in that courtroom was different now. It wasn't disbelief anymore, it was disgust. Petrov's face turned pale. His eyes darted between me, the jury, and the camera. His arrogance had finally met something stronger, evidence. It's a man who preys on trust, who builds relationships only to burn them for profit. You didn't just steal money, you stole dignity. He looked down, no words this time, just silence. I leaned back, the gravity of it all sinking in. Mrs. Walsh's voice gave this court its conscience, I said. And this evidence gave it proof. The predator you see before you is not just a man who broke the law, he broke something sacred. When I struck the gavel, it wasn't just to close testimony. It was to mark the end of his illusion. The mask had fallen. The predator had been unmasked. And in that courtroom, the truth finally stood taller than the deceit that tried to bury it. There's a certain energy that settles in a courtroom before a verdict. It's quiet, heavy, almost sacred. Everyone knows something final is coming. For Alex Petrov, that silence wasn't peace. It was judgment closing in. He sat there, no longer the confident man who had strutted in with a smile and a Rolex glinting in the light. His hands were folded tightly in front of him now, The smooth, practiced grin long gone. Pride has a way of collapsing quietly, and in that moment his was in ruins. I remember looking at him for a long moment before speaking. Mr. Petrov, I began softly, you came into this courtroom dressed for success. Expensive suit, polished shoes, head held high. You said held high. You look like a man in control. But now, after hearing everything we've heard, what I see before me is something entirely different. I see a man who used charm as a weapon and kindness as a disguise. He looked up, his expression tight, trying to hold on to the last fragments of his confidence. You didn't just take money, I continued. You took advantage of trust, the most valuable currency a person can give another, especially from someone like Mrs. Walsh, who was grieving, lonely, and simply needed someone to care. His attorney tried one last time to interject. Your Honor, if I may. I said, firm but calm. You may not. I've heard enough defense for one lifetime. Now it's time for truth to be heard clearly. The courtroom was silent. You could almost hear the air conditioning hum above. I picked up the documents, bank statements, property transfer papers, the fake insurance forms. Each one was a piece of his deception. Each one carried the weight of his choices. This is about confusion, I said. This isn't about paperwork errors or immigration challenges, as you claimed. This is about greed. He looked away. Hey, Mr. Petrov, I said, when you stole from Mrs. Walsh, you didn't just steal her money. You stole her peace. You made her feel small, foolish, and ashamed. You understand the cruelty in that? You made her believe she was at fault for your lies. Still, he said nothing. I continued, my voice quieter now, almost reflective. Well, my father used to tell me something when I was a boy. He'd say, Frank, when you take advantage of someone weaker than you lose more than your honor. You lose the right to call yourself a man. I paused. And that lesson, Mr. Petrov, is the one you've clearly never learned. He blinked rapidly, staring down at the table. I could tell the words were landing. Whether they changed anything in him, that was another matter. And now, I said, we turn to sentencing. The clerk handed me the final case file. Inside were the rulings I'd already drafted, each one deliberate and precise. I read them slowly, clearly, so there would be no misunderstanding. First, I began. The 2023 BMW 7 Series registered under Mrs. Walsh's name. The car you've been driving is hereby seized by the court and returned to its rightful owner. The transfer of title obtained under fraudulent circumstances is null and void. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Petrov's face went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand. You don't, I said simply. I second the power of attorney signed by Mrs. Walsh under your influence is revoked effective immediately. You will have no control, no access, no say over her financial or personal affairs ever again. He shook his head, muttering under his breath. This is ridiculous. I leaned forward. Why ridiculous? Mr. Petrov is pretending to be a savior while acting like a thief. Ridiculous is taking advantage of a 78-year-old woman's trust and calling it a misunderstanding. His jaw tightened, but his eyes, they betrayed fear. Third, I continued, this court refers your actions to the district attorney's office for a full criminal investigation into elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. You will cooperate fully. Every document, every account, every transfer will be reviewed. You could see the blood drain from his face. He wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't charming or composed. He was cornered. A fourth, I said, you are ordered to vacate Mrs. Walsh's residence within 48 hours. You will not contact her again, not in person, not by phone, not through anyone else. If you do, you'll be in violation of this court's order and face immediate arrest. He clenched his fists. No, Mr. Petrov, I said sharply. You've had your say. Now you'll listen. I took a deep breath before continuing. A fifth, you will provide a full accounting of every dollar withdrawn or spent from Mrs. Walsh's accounts. Failure to produce accurate records will result in contempt of court and potential jail. I paused, letting that sink in. Finally, all alleged debts owed by Mrs. Walsh to you, including rent, care fees, or personal loans, are declared void. You owe her restitution in the amount of $89,000, plus interest. The courtroom was utterly silent. Petrov looked stunned. His eyes darted from me to his attorney to the documents on the desk. His arrogance had crumbled, his control shattered. Your Honor, he finally said, his voice quieter now. I never meant to hurt her. I nodded slowly. I believe that you convinced yourself of that. But intent doesn't erase impact. You told yourself a story where you were the good guy, where you were helping, guiding, supporting. But the truth is, you helped yourself. You guided her into dependency. You supported your lifestyle with her savings. And now that story ends. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Pride had been replaced by something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. I turned toward Mrs. Walsh, who was sitting quietly, tears in her eyes but relief written across her face. "Ah, Mrs. Walsh," I said gently, "you showed extraordinary courage. You trusted the justice system when someone broke your trust completely. Today that trust is restored." She nodded, whispering, "Thank you, Your Honor." I looked back at Alex Petrov one last time. "Mr. Petrov, I hope you take this as a lesson, though I fear you won't. You see, money and manipulation might give you temporary comfort, but they strip you of something much harder to recover. Dignity. And dignity, once lost, is worth more than all the luxury in the world." I picked up the gavel. All rulings are effective immediately. The gavel fell with a sharp, echoing crack, final, unflinching, and absolute. That was the sound of pride breaking. And in its place, justice stood tall. When the gavel struck that final time, the sound echoed longer than usual, as if the courtroom itself understood the weight of what had just happened. Justice had been delivered, but it wasn't the kind that leaves you feeling triumphant. It was the quiet kind, the heavy kind, the kind that reminds you justice is sometimes about healing the broken, not punishing the wicked. I watched as Alex Petrov stood there, frozen, his confidence gone. His face had lost that self-assured glow, replaced by a pale disbelief. He looked smaller somehow. No longer a man wrapped in arrogance, but a man stripped of illusion. That's what truth does. It doesn't just expose. It humbles. Mrs. Dorothy Walsh sat a few feet away, her hands trembling in her lap. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from release. For months, she had lived in the shadow of manipulation, doubting her own memory, questioning her own worth. And now, in this courtroom, she had found her voice again. As the bailiff collected the paperwork and Alex handed over the car keys, I saw her watching quietly. That simple act, those keys leaving his hand, meant more than any verdict could express. It wasn't just a car being returned. It was dignity being restored. "Walsh," I said gently, "you've shown remarkable courage today. It takes strength to admit you've been deceived, even greater strength to confront the person who deceived you." She nodded softly. "Just wanted to do the right thing, Your Honor. I didn't want anyone else to go through what I did." Her words lingered. The right thing. In my years on the bench, I've seen people justify all sorts of wrongs in the name of survival, ambition, or convenience. But doing the right thing, especially when you've been wronged, that's rare. That's what gives justice. Alex Petrov was escorted from the courtroom. I watched him go, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness. Because I know men like him. I've seen them before. Clever, charming, and convinced the rules don't apply to them. They confuse manipulation with intelligence as weakness. But eventually, life teaches everyone, one way or another, that deception has a price. As he disappeared down the hallway, Mrs. Walsh's attorney approached. "Your Honor," she said, "thank you for how you handled this." She was terrified to testify. I smiled faintly. "You know," I said, "courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up with shaking hands and a steady heart." Dorothy stood up, steadying herself with her walker. "Your Honor," she said softly, "I don't know what will happen now. I don't have much money left. But I feel like I can breathe again." I nodded. "You will rebuild, and you won't be alone. The court will connect you with elder advocacy services. They'll help you protect what's yours, your home, your assets, your future." She smiled for the first time since the hearing began. "Thank you, Judge. You've given me something I thought I'd lost." "Oh, what's that?" I asked. "A trust," she whispered. That word, trust, it hit me harder than any legal argument ever could, because that's what this was all about. It was about restoring faith in people, in justice, in the idea that goodness still has power. After she left, I sat for a while in the empty courtroom. The light from the tall windows stretched across the floor, touching the bench, the seats, the space where truth had just fought its quiet battle. I thought about my father again, how he used to say, "The real test of a man isn't how he treats the powerful, but how he treats the powerless. I see that truth play out in this courtroom every single day. Mrs. Walsh had been powerless in her own home, a victim of trust misplaced. But today, through truth, she reclaimed that power. And as for Alex Petrov, his punishment wasn't just legal, it was moral. He had to face himself now, stripped of excuses, forced to see the man behind the mirror. I often tell young lawyers and new judges that justice isn't about revenge, it's about balance. When someone tips that balance to deceit, our job is to set it right, not with hatred, but with clarity. And sometimes that clarity comes in moments like this one. The next morning, my clerk told me that Elder Services had already reached out to Mrs. Walsh. Her car had been returned to her driveway. Volunteers from the local community were helping her set up stronger financial protections. She even received a visit from a neighbor who said, "You inspired me to check on my mother's caregiver." That's when I realized justice, when done right, doesn't end with a verdict. It ripples. It moves beyond these walls. It changes how people think, how they protect one another, how they rebuild faith. Later that week, a letter arrived at the courthouse. The handwriting was shaky but neat. It was from Mrs. Walsh. It read, "Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted you to know that I'm doing better. The house feels like mine again. I even drove to church for the first time in a year. I know you see a lot of cases, but you didn't just give me justice, you gave me back my life. Thank you." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer, the one where I keep reminders of why I do this job. Because behind every case number, every document, every legal term, there's a human being, someone who's afraid, someone who's hurt, someone who just needs to be seen. As I closed the courtroom that day, I looked at the empty seats and thought about all the Mrs. Walshes out there, trusting, hopeful, and too often betrayed. If even one of them sees this story and decides to speak up, to reach out, to believe that justice is still possible, then that's redemption. Not just for her, but for all of us.